airplane ride in the year 2030, looking down on the Western world. We don't get to China or India. That has been solarized. And, you know, it was kind of a pipe dream way back in the 1970s when we first started the no nukes movement to think that the whole world could run on renewable energy. But as Jen has pointed out, there have been tremendous advances in renewables. We now have an entire state in Germany, Schleswig-Holstein, where those big black and white cows come from, that has been running 100% on renewables. This is, you know, Germany is not exactly hippie heaven. Well, there are a lot of hippies in Germany now, but it's not exactly a frivolous country. It's the fourth largest economy in the world, the biggest economy in Europe, and they have made the decision to transition 100% to renewable energy. No more nuclear, first of all. No more coal, oil, or nukes, or gas. What I call King Kong, coal, oil, nukes, and gas. And they are the large corporations, and this could not have happened in Germany without the cooperation and consent of the large corporations, Siemens and all these other big dudes. And the woman, the Prime Minister of Germany, Angela Merkel, is not exactly a flower child. She's a chemical engineer and is known as being center-right. Now, a lot of this happened because of Fukushima, or some of it happened because of Fukushima, let's put it that way. And those of you who are interested in the really bad news, you might want to Google, it's at the Free Press website, an article I wrote called Fukushima's Children Are Dying. And the bad news is that the cancer rate, thyroid cancer rate among children around Fukushima, they're studying 375,000 children. The thyroid cancer rate among the children near Fukushima is 40 times normal. 40 times normal. There are over 120 cases of thyroid cancer among children around Fukushima, where 3 would be expected. We also have a situation where almost half, about 48% right now, but it will go past half at some point, of the children in the Fukushima area have thyroid abnormalities, mostly cysts and tumors on their thyroids. And this is obviously cancer waiting to happen. And there's a clear explanation for it. I'll get you, Orion. When a nuclear disaster happens, or even when it doesn't happen, nuclear plants normally emit iodine-131. And iodine will go to your thyroid. You have to have thyroid. Your thyroid needs iodine. If the iodine that goes to your thyroid is radioactive, iodine-131 is a beta emitter. It emits electrons. And the iodine gets in there, radioactive, and the electrons will destroy your thyroid tissue. And if in small children, the thyroids are growing very rapidly, and so if their thyroids are harmed by electrons, they will get abnormalities and probably cancer. The last thing that the developing child wants is an impaired thyroid. Adults can actually deal with it, but children, it has a terrible impact. Ryan, did you want to say something? What's that? Well, I'd actually like to start with the Prime Minister of Japan right now and put him off the planet, because he's very pro-nuclear. But it's an impossible situation to deal with. Fukushima is huge. I was in Japan in the mid-1970s. We marched against Fukushima. People said, what the hell are you doing building a nuclear plant in an earthquake tsunami zone? And this was not unanticipated. And the industry and the government said, oh, it won't happen, and we are sufficiently protected. But, you know, as we find out, it is absolutely not the case. At Fukushima, they're still dumping 300 tons of radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean every day. And these jerks, you know, they go around on these TV shows, these pompous windbags, and they say, well, it's not enough radiation to harm anybody. The Pacific Ocean is huge. First of all, it's bullshit. They have tested, and I will get to you by the way, they have tested 15 tuna were caught off, tested off the coast of California, and all 15 showed radioactive contamination from Fukushima. And then they'll say, well, of course it's not, you can eat the whole tuna and it won't harm you. Well, what is this radiation doing to the algae, and to the phytoplankton, and to the starfish, and to the reefs, and to all the microorganisms in the ocean that we depend on? There are people with reports now that the ocean is dying. There's a guy who sailed 3,000 miles in the part of the ocean. He said he didn't see anything at all alive. And so, you know, this is the death of life on Earth as we know it. And so all the nuclear plants need to shut.
Right, because they're all at more risk because of the serious storms that are coming about because of climate change.
Yes, and also,
they're all at the end of the design.
if you, what's that?
They're all at the end of the design.
Right,
They're at the end, yes, they're old, you know, like me, they're at the end of the design. I'm 68. Some of the reactors are almost as old as I am, for God's sake. And fracking. You know, fracking causes earthquakes. And these idiots are fracking near nuclear plants.
Actually, it's the injection. It's the injection that causes.
They both do.
Yes, and I have read now that Oklahoma, which is being fracked to hell, has more earthquakes now than California. We're creating earthquakes. And they are fracking near Davis-Besse. God forbid there should be an earthquake at Davis-Besse. That thing will crumble like paper mache. That thing is really old, decrepit, horrible problems. Yes, young lady.
I was just going to ask you, where did you read that?
Where did I read what?
Previously, you said I read it.
It's on the internet. And go to nukefree.org, nukefree.org. Thank you very much. I edit nukefree.org. So fracking is beating the hell out of our planet. The premise of Solartopia, which was visioned as a pipe dream many years ago. In fact, in 1975, when we first in Western Massachusetts started finding nuclear power, there was a Toward Tomorrow fair at the University of Massachusetts. And people talked about this, and we had this vision of a green-powered Earth, and everybody said, oh, it's decades away. Well, what has happened is our movement, our environmental movement, our green power movement, our movement against nuclear power, has actually birthed the biggest industry in the history of the world, which is photovoltaic cells. Photovoltaic cells will be, dollar-wise and employment-wise, the biggest movement in history, biggest industry in history. Photovoltaic cells have plummeted in cost. These are the flat panels that convert sunlight to electricity. They have plummeted in cost, and they have soared in efficiency. My nephew now is I have two nephews in Washington, D.C. One of them is a professor of solar energy at George Washington University. They have just put in a huge solar array at George Washington and American universities in D.C. that will provide, in some cases, 100% of the electricity being used in many parts of these campuses. This could not have been done even 10 years ago. My other nephew is selling window glass that has photovoltaic embedded in it. And so you can build a new building and you won't be able to distinguish the window glass from any other window glass, but it produces the electricity used in the building. Now all this stuff is happening all across the board. And the reality is, as Jen said, photovoltaic cells are the cheapest, not only the cheapest, but the cleanest, safest, most efficient and most job producing, but they are the cheapest form of new electrical generation out there. 80% of the new energy capacity being built in the United States and in much of Europe is renewable. Mostly solar and wind, but you've also got, now we're on the brink of legalizing marijuana, you've got hemp coming. Hemp is a great source of renewable energy. The seeds produce oil, and the cellulosic stems and leaves can be fermented into ethanol. You have geothermal, ocean thermal. You have windmills that are now underwater that are turned by currents. You have tidal energy, wave energy. Wave energy is my favorite. They have these big things that look like sausages, and they just sit out there and they go up and down, and they squish water. And so all this stuff is happening now. And what we have in power in this country is a fossil nuclear, coal, oil, nukes, and gas, King Kong, fossil nuclear industry that can't let go, that spends hundreds of millions of dollars on these interchanges and widening these highways, kills trains, kills mass transit, does everything in its power to protect the horse and buggy automobile industry. We have a situation now, I love it, all these free market guys the right-wing Republicans, the Koch brothers, who say they're against taxes except when it comes to solar. All these market guys are trying to kill the electric car. Again, why did Detroit die? Detroit died because the morons who ran General Electric, General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford would not build energy-efficient cars. They had two shots at it. In the 70s, right, in the middle of the oil embargo, they had the opportunity to downsize these cars and to make them efficient, and they wouldn't do it. So who came in? Honda and Toyota, right? Then in the 90s, they had the chance again to build hybrids, and they wouldn't do it. Who built hybrids? Again, Toyota and Honda. Now, these guys don't want to build the Tesla. The Tesla goes from 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. They're complaining that we don't want to have Tesla dealerships because they won't service the cars. Here's the problem. Here's the secret. Electric cars don't need service, for God's sakes. The brakes can go wrong. The CD player might break, but electric cars are so much more efficient than gas and oil cars. You don't change the oil in electric cars. You don't have to, piddle with all these other things that they have to do at the service stations. And so, we're on the brink. We're actually over the brink already on the greatest technological revolution in human history. It's part and parcel of the internet. The internet, of course, changed everything in the 1990s and onward. Can you imagine what we would be without the internet? If you had described the internet to college students, which I was one in the 1960s, it would have qualified as science fiction. The idea that you could send messages instantly all over the world, all this stuff, the internet has completely transformed the human consciousness. But what's coming now, and it's part and parcel of the internet, is the renewable revolution. It's all digital. It's all based on wafers and silicon, and it is happening so fast. What we have is the Koch brothers standing in the way because they're invested in King Kong and coal and nuclear. But when we get them out of the way, we will have mass transit, we will have renewables, everything will be, if we can get there. If we can prevent the frackers from destroying the planet, if we can prevent more nuclear meltdowns, God forbid, we should have another TMI, Chernobyl, Fukushima. If we can stop the Gulf spills, for Christ's sake, before they kill everything, we will have this transformation. So, did you want to add to that, please?
How do you do? For those of you who just came, my name is Alec Johnson. I'm an occasional Buckeye. I now live in East Texas, and I'm proud to be part of the tar sands blockade. But first, what I'd like to do is I would like to associate myself with all of the remarks made by the previous speakers and definitely underscore the efforts that they're all making. I admire Sierra Club tremendously. And I got to tell you, this community Bill of Rights that you're working on is huge. This is not only the quickest way you can protect yourself, but the way you can revive authentic democracy, the real deal. So I want to support that as much as I can. I wanted to talk for a bit, though, about some real big picture stuff. I want to put this in context. A couple of years ago, Bill McKibben wrote an article. I'd encourage you all to read it. It's called Global Warming's Terrifying New Math. And here are the figures. We can afford to put 565 gigatons of carbon dioxide up into the atmosphere before we basically have runaway global warming, before we're in a position where we can't do anything for millennia to correct it. 565 gigatons. Well, dig this. The industry has 2,765 gigatons that they are determined to ignite for profit. That's almost 5 times our budget. That's one of the reasons why Bill McKibben correctly calls this industry a criminal enterprise. Their project is to destroy our children's future. They're doing it with all of the elements of King Kong that you mentioned. So this is huge. But here's the thing, if you actually work these numbers, what this means is that our movement, everyone here alive today, has to see to it that 80% of those fossil fuel reserves stay in the ground. 80%. Now, in rough figures, we're talking about $20 trillion. So that means that we've got to somehow be able to tell everything from the governments of Saudi Arabia to the boards of ExxonMobil, all of that wealth you think you have, all of that stuff you're pricing into stock worth $20 trillion, you can't have it. That's what's at stake. It's a big deal. Now, interestingly enough, there is a historical corollary, and this state contributed to it mightily. During the Civil War, the effect of the Civil War was to turn about $10 trillion worth of wealth in the form of slaves into nothing. Before the Civil War started, slaves were worth more than all the banks, factories, and railroads in the United States. And the abolition movement was going to turn all of that into nothing. We have to do the same thing. It is a big deal. And by the way, failure cannot be an option. It's certainly not going to be an option if you ever want to look your grandchildren in the eyes. It's just not an option. You know how much $1 trillion is, by the way? It's a pretty big figure. Usually your eyes glaze over. I'll give you a visual. Take $1,000 bills, stack them one on top of another, 67.9 miles high, and you got yourself $1 trillion. Okay? Now what we have to do is we have to turn about 20 of those stacks into nothing. Okay? We have to fight the fossil fuel industry to its knees. And if we fail, the consequences will be staggering. Absolutely staggering. And you know, in a way, it's already too late. As Bill McKibben pointed out, we're already in a change earth. But if we don't really take aggressive steps now, it'll get way out of control. And by out of control, I mean it'll go nuts in ways that we can't do anything about it for millennia, thousands of years. I'm the father of Eliza and Amelia Johnson. I care about my children. I care about my children. It has to be for them. We have every right to enact every right. By the way, in our country, there's something known as the public trust doctrine that states that the government, looking after public assets, has to exercise the highest duty of care for our atmosphere. So that doesn't allow them to pander to any corporation or any segment of corporations, no matter how rich they might be, without engaging in the utmost dereliction of duty. So on Earth Day in 2013, when I locked down on heavy equipment in Tushka, Oklahoma, I did so to send a loud message. I was enforcing the law. I wasn't breaking it. I was enforcing the law. I was enforcing the right of all of our children to an atmosphere. And I want to thank you for your time. And listen, join us in this struggle. This is your struggle. And we live in a state, by the way, that contributed mightily to abolitionism. This state had over 200 stations in the Underground Railroad. And by the way, there were two sons of Ohio. You may remember their names were Grant and Sherman. And without them, we would not have ended slavery and we would not have ended the Civil War. We live in a great state with a great heritage. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, great. And William Sherman's middle name